Hey guys, it was a great night of fights in Montreal. One of the biggest gates that the UFC's ever done, and I think the biggest one they've ever done in Canada as well as North America, I think they said in the press conference. So a really big night, pretty good night of fights, couple knockouts, couple submissions, and then some decisions as well. But more importantly, it lays the landscape for the future of some of the different divisions, especially the lighter weight classes in 2011. Fight of the night went to GSP versus Koscheck, and it's worth noting that that was voted on by the fans, who would tend to pick the bigger fights rather than some of the great prelims that we had. Submission of the night was actually split between Jim Miller's knee bar of Charles Oliveira and, man, who was the other one? Tim Bocek's submission of Dustin Hazlett. KO of the night went to Mac Danzing for his left hook of Joe Stevenson. And as for me, my picks were 2 for 4. St. Pierre defeated Koscheck via unanimous decision. Stefan Struve got a TKO of Sean McCorkle in the first round. Joe Stevenson was knocked out by Mac Danzing early in the first round. And then Thiago Alves rode a dominant decision to John Howard. Starting with the main event, GSP versus Kosh, this was a good fight. It was entertaining. There was a lot of tension with the crowd that I was at. And obviously the crowd in Montreal was really fired up. This fight went about how I expected. The two fighters each had a game plan, but GSP was just able to dismantle Koscheck. What was surprising with GSP was he did what I thought he would do, but he was actually a little bit more singular-minded than I thought he would be. I thought he would have a little bit more variety in his strikes, but really he had one plan in mind, which was to work that jab. He worked the jab, and then as soon as Koscheck would wise up and raise his hands a little more, he would start with those takedowns, and then when those were ineffective, he replaced it with that inside leg kick, and he would just keep switching off. But that jab was very good. I remember that back when he was fighting for the championship his first time, people were saying that he had the best jab in the UFC at the time, and I think maybe we had forgotten that a little bit. And really, I'd never seen an eye close up as fast as Koscheck's eye closed up. I mean, that was really nasty. I don't think he could really see right, and GSP wanted the finish. He was disappointed he didn't get it, but I think he was the only one. It's hard to finish Koscheck. It's hard to knock him out, and I think GSP did about as good as anyone could have asked for. As far as Koscheck, I will give him credit. He defended GSP's takedowns very well in the first round, and actually got a takedown of his own. And no one's taken GSP down since Matt Hughes, and I don't think anyone has defended a GSP takedown since BJ Penn, and both of those were quite a while ago. So props to Koscheck for that. Everything else, his game plan did seem to be to take him down, and he was somewhat successful in the first round, but he had to fail, I think, 2 or 3 takedowns before he got the one at the end of the first, and then when he got it, he didn't have enough time to really do a lot with it. I think, especially as the fight developed in the 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds, I think Koscheck suffered from a little bit of paralysis. He didn't really have a plan after the takedowns were ineffective. He couldn't get on the inside with his striking, and in the 4th and 5th round in particular, he basically stopped throwing punches. I was counting. I'm not sure if he threw any punches in the 5th round. I mean, he really was like a deer in the headlights. That eye was swollen shut, and GSP was just taking him to task. What's next for these fighters? GSP's the most dominant champion in welterweight history, and the next fight that people have talked about for him, and even Dana White has alluded to, is going to be Jake Shields. I really am not too excited about this fight for a couple reasons. One, I don't think Jake Shields brings anything different to the table than Josh Koscheck did. Him and Josh are essentially the same fighter. They're both very, very good wrestlers who have developed some decent striking skills. I think Koscheck is actually a little bit better of a striker than Jake Shields, and I think he's got some more explosive takedowns. So I don't think Shields has any chance of beating GSP. And secondly, I don't think this is good from a money perspective from the UFC. You know, Jake Shields has done a lot of great things in MMA, but he's done all of them outside the UFC. The vast majority of fans only watch the UFC, and if all they've seen is his fight against Martin Kampmann, they probably think this guy sucks, and that he's has no business being in a ring with GSP, and I don't think it would sell a lot of money. I think the best move for GSP right now is to spend the first half of 2011 gaining weight, adjusting his diet, getting up to 185, and then I think he should fight Anderson Silva. I know Silva has his 2 fights booked for 11, but I think if the UFC really wants to make some money, I mean, the biggest fight in MMA history probably would be GSP versus Silva. They should have Silva fight Belfort. If he wins, they should cancel the Yushin Okami fight, and they should schedule their big December card for GSP versus Silva. Will they do it? I kind of think they won't, but I think that they're really seriously running out of options for GSP. As for Koscheck, he's going to be in a world of hurt right now. The UFC is now in a position where they have to give him good fights, entertaining fights, but they have to give him fights that won't get him any closer to a title shot. So even though, we might want to see Koscheck versus Alves 2 or something like that, they're going to keep him away from big names, and I think you're going to see him fighting guys, maybe Carlos Condit, maybe the Korean guy that's fighting Nick Diaz next, so it's going to be interesting what happens with him. The co-main event obviously didn't go the way I thought it was going to go, but I don't really feel too bad about that. I mean, I picked Sean McCorkle, but I did mention that I didn't really know a lot about him. Stefan Struve, he was impressive. He fought good off the ground. He was taking some damage from Sean McCorkle. I really thought that Sean had his Kimura attempt tight, but Struve was able to get out of it, execute a beautiful jiu-jitsu sweep from his back, got on top, and TKO'd McCorkle almost immediately. I was surprised that McCorkle tried to do as much ground and pound as he did. I thought he would and should have tried to stood and trade with him, get inside of his range, but that's what happened. And Struve is really setting himself up where I don't think he's going to fight on anything less than a main card or maybe the head of a fight night for the rest of 2011. And the UFC could go one of 2 directions with him. If they want to set him up to be a potential contender, then I really think Mirko Cro Cop would be a great matchup for him. It'd be create a lot of hype and buzz, but I think it's a winnable fight for him. If they want to sacrifice him for one of their other up-and-comers, then I really think they should throw him against Brendan Schwab. I think Brendan would destroy Stefan Struve, and it would be a good fight either way. As for Sean McCorkle, I don't think he's going to get cut. The UFC heavyweight division is one of the safest divisions to keep your job in at this point, and I think they are going to throw him against someone else. Problem is, we really don't know much more about him than we did going in, other than that he's susceptible to some sweeps when he's on top, but they'll probably throw him against another prospect, and we'll see how he does. The other fight on the card was, what was it? Mac Danzig versus Joe Stevenson. I thought Stevenson would have this fight, but Mac Danzig knocked him out with a really odd left hook. I mean, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt because Danzig said that he had worked on that left hook a lot in training. But to me, it seemed like it was really more of a 1 in a million shot. I don't want to say that he got lucky. I mean, maybe he knew exactly what he was doing, but he was backing up when he threw that left hook, and it reminded me a little bit of the hook that dropped Randy Couture from Brock Lesnar. It just seemed like it was so small and insignificant, but every now and then I think you get that 1 in a million shot. I think that's what happened to Mac Danzig, and it's not going to get any easier. I think that he's still going to be fighting for his job. I mean, the guy's 6-6 now, and he's trying to compete in the best division in the world, in the best organization in the world. So it's hard to say who they're going to match up against him next. As for Joe Stevenson, he might get cut, and I wouldn't be surprised if he did, but I think they're going to keep him around for maybe 1 or 2 more fights. There's a lot of WEC fighters coming in, and I'd love to see Stevenson versus someone like Jamie Varner or something like that. So yeah, interesting to see what's going to happen to the lightweights. How cutthroat the UFC is going to be from here on out. And the last fight that I covered that was on the main card was Thiago Alves versus John Howard. Again, this fight went about how I thought it would be. I thought John Howard would have a little bit more for him. I was surprised at how easily Alves seemed to be dominating him. And Alves really seemed to take a page out of GSP's book. His game plan was very simple. He was going to work those Muay Thai leg kicks, and as soon as Howard dropped his hands to try to defend him, he was throwing combinations at him. And he did have some really good combinations. I mean, he was getting the better of every exchange. Alves looked good. He's on the Dolce diet now. His weight was good. He made weight the day before. His cardio looked fine. And going forward from him, you know, the great thing about Alves is I can't think of any bad matchup or fight for him in the UFC unless you put him against a super high-level grappler. But, I mean, who wouldn't love to see Thiago Alves versus Carlos Condit? Thiago Alves versus Dan Hardy would be a fantastic fight. So there's a lot of good things coming from this guy in the future, and might even work his way back up to title contention. As for John Howard, he'll be back. He'll be around. He's going to learn from this. I think that he needs to diversify his game. I mean, everyone knows what his powers and strengths are. He needs to go back, work on his wrestling that he came into the UFC with so that he has a little bit more options, because otherwise guys are going to have his number, and Alves has laid the template of how to. Lastly, there were a couple other significant fights on this card that I wasn't able to cover in the primer, but ones to keep in mind: Sean Pearson had a fantastic fight against Matthew Riddle. I really thought that Riddle had the knockout power in this, but he really was just winging punches. It was almost comical how little he was landing in that third round. I mean, he was obviously throwing stuff that had no chance of hitting. Pearson continued to work the jab really good. He had good combinations. He handled them pretty well on the ground, and other than a late round rally by Matthew Riddle in the third round, you know, Pearson just dominated. It was his UFC debut, and you know, I think the middleweight division is one that the competition's a little bit lacking right now, so I think they're going to throw him right in there with some higher level competition in the future. You know, maybe him, I don't think he'd get as high as like Nate Marquardt, but you know, he might get like a Damian Maia, or maybe even a Chael Sonnen sometime in the future, Michael Bisping. So yeah, I think that he really proved what he was worth by getting on the main card. Other fights, Charles Oliveira had his first career loss to Jim Miller. This was a great fight. Charles Oliveira, I was really impressed by him. Even though he lost, he tried for, I think, 3 or 4 submissions on his back within about 30 seconds. So he has a really active guard, but he made a mistake, got caught in a knee bar by Jim Miller. And Jim Miller has really snuck up on the lightweight division, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more from him in 2011. Again, in the lightweight division, there's no bad fights to make with this guy, and the only downside I can see from him is there's such a long line of contenders. You know, whoever becomes the UFC champion is going to have to fight whoever wins the last WEC this week. Then after that is George Sotiropoulos, and Jim Miller might be a distant 3rd or 4th, despite the fact how good he is. So looking forward to seeing him in the future, and Charles Oliveira too. I think there's a lot of great matchups for that kid. Other significant fights was probably, the only other one was Dustin Hazlett versus Tim Boschek. Hazlett lost. I think it's his 3rd or 4th loss in 5 or 6 fights, so he's looking like he's going to get cut from the UFC. He's a good fighter. He's done a lot of good for the organization, but I just don't think he can hack it in his division anymore. And Tim Boschek had a great submission, and he's going to get himself probably on a fight night card, maybe even the headline of a fight like night card in 2011. And I'm looking forward to that. I think that's going to be great. Well, that's it for breaking down the fights in UFC 124. Might continue to do this in the future, so let me know what you think, if you agree or disagree with me. And